Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about some scale drawings and scale models. So what is the difference between those two things? Well, it just depends on how many dimensions we're working with. So for a scale drawing, it's going to be a proportional two-dimensional drawing of an object. And so we're going to do an example here with a map. And then a scale model would be a proportional three-dimensional drawing of an object. So we'll do an example of a scale model at the end of this video, and we'll also talk about what a scale factor would be to know maybe how much we are multiplying by or dividing by to go from maybe our original object to our model of our object, okay? All right, so what is scale? Scale is just the ratio that compares the measurements in drawings. So for example, we could say, hey, 1 inch of this drawing, it represents actually 30 miles, okay? And so we're gonna take a map here that I just got from Apple Maps, and notice here in the top left-hand corner, we have this scale right here, which tells me whatever that distance is there, it is equal to 150 miles. So I'll bring on my ruler here, and we can measure this to get a decent estimation of how far this would be. So let me put this right here. Okay, we see that this mark right here would be 1 inch. Okay, now obviously I've got this zoomed in a little bit, so that looks like more than 1 inch, but that's what 1 inch is because I've got it zoomed in. So if I look here, okay, this would be about half of an inch, okay? So if we want to, we could say this is, 1/2 an inch would be 150 miles, but that's gonna probably throw our calculations off just a little bit. So let's actually break this down a little bit more. So if this is 1/2, look at these tick marks here, right? We know that we have this line, this line, this line, this line, this line, and this line. So that would be eighths, right? So 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, which would be 1/2. So what would be in between my eighths there? So let's say I had this point right here, okay? Well, if I break that down even further, that would be 1/16, right? So this would be like 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16, 5/16, 6/16. Oh, I messed up there. Let me go back. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16/16, right? So if we look at where our line is, it looks like it appears to be 7/16 of an inch, okay? So when you're doing this on whatever drawing you're looking at, perhaps it'll be a little bit easier, but we're gonna go with 7/16 as our measurement. So let's zoom back out. So our ratio here, we're going to say 7/16 of an inch to 150 miles, okay? All right, so that's going to be our scale here. So now let's bring back the ruler and let's answer this question. It says, what is the actual distance from Chicago to Washington, D.C.? So we're going to measure this as the crow flies, if you've ever heard that saying before. Basically, it's not if you go into your navigational system, Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever, and find the driving distance. Obviously, there's not a straight line driving distance from Chicago to Washington, D.C. So that mileage could be a little bit off. So we might still be a little bit off here in this video because obviously we went with 7/16 of an inch. That might not be exactly right, but it is pretty close, and that's going to satisfy our needs for this video. All right, so let's bring the ruler back up. And let's line this up from Chicago to Washington, D.C. So let me get this to be correct here. All right, that looks pretty good. Let me slide it over so that we have our 0 mark on Chicago. And here's Washington, D.C. Okay, so it looks like it's a little bit past 1.5 inches, but let's just go with 1.5 for ease of calculation. All right. So let's say this is 1.5 inches, and we're trying to figure out how many miles that would be. So let's set up a proportion. So we can say 7/16 over 150 is equal to 1.5 over x. So we know that our inches is on the top there, and our miles is on the bottom. So let's cross multiply this. So we would get 7/16 x is equal to, and 150 times 1.5 would give us 225. So now let's take 225 and let's multiply here by 16 over 7 so that we can get rid of this coefficient over here. So x is equal to, so 225 times 16, and let's divide that by 7. And that's going to give me 514 0.28 miles. So let's just go 514 miles. Okay, so this would be an estimate here based on our calculations, but from the scale, using the scale, 7/16 of an inch to 150 miles, we measured that distance to be 1.5 inches approximately. And so in terms of miles, that would be 514 miles from Chicago to Washington, D.C. Okay? All right, now that would be an example of a scale drawing because that was a two-dimensional drawing of our map. So now let's take a look at what scale factor is, and let's talk about a scale model, which is a three-dimensional shape or a three-dimensional drawing or object of some other object. So what is a scale factor? It's a ratio written without units because the units are the same. So we're going to take a scale model example here of a building, and we're going to find the scale factor. So I can already see a typo that I made, a scale model of a building. Forgot my D in there, so put a D. So scale model of a building is 10 inches tall. The actual building is 100 feet tall. Find the scale factor. Okay, so what is our ratio here? What is our scale? Well, we know that 10 inches is 100 feet. Okay, so now let's break this down until we get to 1 inch. So if I have 10 inches and 100 feet, to go from 10 to 1 inch, we could divide by 10. So let's do 1 inch, and then we got to also divide our feet by 10. So that would be 10 feet. But we need to now write both of these numbers with the same unit so that we could find the scale factor. Well, I know that there are 12 inches in 1 foot. 12 inches equals 1 foot. So if I have 10 feet, that would be 10 times 12 inches. So we could say 1 inch to 120 inches. And now that our units are the same, we can now use that as our scale factor. So our scale factor would be equal to 1 over 120. Okay, now the reason why that is a number between 0 and 1 is because we are making a scale model of a larger building. So we're taking the building and we are making a reduction of the building. So in that case, since the new model is smaller, then the scale factor should be between 0 and 1. That way our model will be smaller. So that would be considered a reduction in that case. Okay. Now, if the question asks us kind of the other way around, what would the scale factor be from the model to the actual building? Well, then we're getting larger, right? So that would be an enlargement. So in that case, the scale factor wouldn't be 1 over 120. It would be 120. That number would need to be greater than 1 because we are getting larger from the model to the building. So just be careful on that, on the wording, on how they ask the question in the direction that you're going to determine if it's a reduction or an enlargement. Okay, so that's how we can deal with some scale drawings and models.